Hey, everybody, welcome back to another week 9 here in Com 201. A few things to talk about today, and let's just get right to it. I will change things around here, and let's go to the syllabus for just a minute. So, this is, like I said, week 9. Quiz 4 is due this week, so make sure that you get that done. We're going to talk today about basics of persuasion. So, from a historic perspective, things that we know work. And this will be sort of supplemental to Monroe's. We're all going to use Monroe's, so I'm not going to cover any other organizational strategies like comparative advantages or problem cost solution. We're not going to get into that, but we'll talk more about your thinking when it comes to persuasion. That it's something you've been doing your whole life, and you're probably decent at it. And I just don't want you to not be able to connect what you're going to do in a speech with what you do already and make those sort of connections to see that you're pretty good at this. So that's what we will cover today. I do want to give you the quick heads up. Next week, week 10, is when the persuasive outline is due. So make sure that you've got that ready at the end of next week, and that will be Monroe's. And it says there Monroe's Motivated Sequence Demo, but as you know, I posted that already to give you a head start on it if you wanted it. So if you've not done it, you can go and watch that. And as always, if you have questions on any of this, let me know. We can meet in office hours. We can email. We can meet outside of office hours. You can definitely go to the speech lab. All those things are there for you. All right. Without further ado, let's zip down here to week 9. All right. Last week we talked about Monroe's, as I mentioned. So don't forget the 5 steps of Monroe's. Attention, which is your normal attention getter. Then you've got your need or your problem, and that's going to be main point 1 on your outline. Second, you have, or I guess third in Monroe's, second on the outline, second main point on the outline is the solution or the satisfaction to that problem. Then your third point on the outline, fourth overall in Monroe's, is visualization, where you're going to tell us about how things will improve or change once we solve the problem with your plan specifically. And then the last one, the 5th item in Monroe's, and this will be your closure or come before or after your closure, but right there at the end. And that will be you wrapping things up with a call to action and what we need to do as an audience right now, not in the future, right now, something that's actually realistic. And that can be go to a website, sign a petition, talk to someone about a particular topic, you name it. Now, when we go back in here and we think about persuasion for just a minute, I think it's important to understand that persuasion is everywhere. Everything that I think, at least everything we do, is persuasive in some way. I mean, the fact that you're in this class right now is persuasive in and of itself because you want a college degree. Now, why do you want a college degree? Do you want it so that you can have a deeper understanding of the world? Maybe. Do you want it so that you can get a job that will provide for you and a potential family one day? More than likely. So, just being enrolled in a class like this one should persuade Grand Valley to have you graduate. And when you say, look, I have this degree in this field, that should persuade someone to hire you. And there's other options or other examples, and we'll talk about those as we go. But really, I think persuasion is everywhere. There's a debate in the communication world about, is it possible to not communicate? Is that even possible? Some say yes, some say no. I think that it is not possible to avoid communication. I think everything we do communicates something. And people will give the example of, what about someone locked in solitary confinement with no human contact, not even with the guards? They slide the food through a slot in the door, and that's it. Who are they communicating to and how? That's just not happening, Carl. I think it is. I think they're communicating that they are still taking the food and sending it back out So that means they're indicating that they're still alive, they're still hungry. Now, if they don't take the food, I don't know, are they communicating that they're dead? Even if they really are, can dead people communicate? Maybe. Maybe. What about if you have a roommate who has the lights turned off, they're in their room with the door shut, and they're asleep? Are they communicating? I think so. I think by sleeping, they're saying, I'm tired or I'm in need of sleep. With the door shut, they're saying, I want privacy. I want to be left alone. So there are things that we do, that are seemingly mundane and just inconsequential, but really it's communication and probably persuasion. Now, persuasion proper is an attempt to change an attitude, a belief, a value, or a behavior. You see that on the screen. Let's talk about these for just a moment. Now, I wish I had a whiteboard. This would be so much better with a whiteboard. But let me see if I can make something else work. I know you got to look at my beautiful face a little bit closer. What I'm trying to do is get to where I can write on the screen. Oh, well, let's just do it this way. Here, I tell you what. We'll go old school. So, there is an idea that people are like onions in that they have multiple layers. Now, I used to think that I was pretty clever for doing this. You can see there, it's like an onion. Attitudes are the outside ring because those are closest to the surface and they're easiest to change. Beliefs are more toward the center, so they're harder than attitudes to change, but not as hard as right in the middle, and those are your values. Again, I used to think this was pretty clever until I watched Shrek. Students one time said, yeah, like Shrek says on the movie. I was like, oh, geez, right. So, yes, it's like Shrek says. And there's attitudes that is your general like or dislike of something. There are beliefs, which usually you probably think of religious beliefs. And so, if you have those or if you're opposed to those or wherever you are on that spectrum, that's sort of how rooted beliefs are. But then values are at our core, and that is much more about our enduring concepts of good, bad, right, wrong, innocent people shouldn't suffer harm, that kind of thing. So those are what we're trying to target. Now, for us, stick with attitudes. Don't try to change beliefs and values in a speech class like this. I mean, it can be done through speech, but it usually takes more than one opportunity to talk to a group. I mean, the obvious but most horrendous example is Hitler. When he came to power, the German people weren't bloodthirsty killers. They were just in a bad position in terms of the economy. And they wanted to know what was going on, so they needed someone to blame, and Hitler knew that. And so what he did was he targeted these things in individual steps. So by the way, behaviors can go with any of these. But focus on the attitudes, beliefs, and values. So first he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you're a history major, forgive me, but, to the German people, now I'm in power here. You voted for me. He was elected. And I want to figure out what's going on with our banking system and the economy in Germany. I think something's wrong with it. That's his attitude toward it. So they say, okay, go ahead. So he comes back a little while later and says, I've been looking into the banking system and I'm still doing my work, but I have found that Jewish people seem to be very involved in the banking system. I'm going to look into that. And so then he comes back and says, I've looked into this and it seems like everyone that's making these problems happen are Jewish people. And we need to do something about that. And so he moved from attitudes, liking or disliking something or someone. He got you to dislike the Jewish people, to beliefs, and that is that the Jewish people were inferior to the non-Jewish Germans, right? The Aryan was the thing to be, even though, he wasn't. Strange. But, that was the belief system that he then got to, again, through speeches, by convincing people of to agree with him. And then at the end stages was the value shift. We need to kill these people, and you're going to be okay with that. Not only that, you're going to help me do it. And so many did. And so, that is persuasion. It's used terribly, and it's awful. But it is persuasion in action with these levels. I mean, he peeled the first layer back, the second layer back, and then he got to the core and rotted it. As I mentioned, behaviors can be very inconsequential to very consequential. Obviously, the consequential would be when your values shift and you take lives, for example. I mean, it's unthinkable. But on the attitude version, if you're going to a vending machine to grab a snack, and we're in class, and I say, "Hey, here's $2. Will you get me whatever out of the machine?" If you do that for me, you have been persuaded simply by me asking. That's still a form of persuasion. I didn't have to lay out a very, thoughtful argument or back it up with all these claims. That's it. Just, hey, would you mind to do this? Especially if somebody says, please. I mean, yeah, okay, sure, you seem nice enough. So understand that we're going to focus on attitude changes, and you could focus also on behaviors within the attitude. So, for example, if someone is giving a speech on recycling, the thing to do is not to get people to go from zero recycling to a full-on, zero waste household. That's not going to happen in a single speech. Instead, change the attitude about recycling. So if they don't do it, clearly they don't see it as important enough to take their time to do. So if you can just get them to consider it, great, you've made progress. You've been persuasive. If you can get them to only recycle their cans because, hey, remember, there's money in that for them. You've done work. You've made this happen. But again, going further than those small behavior changes or attitude changes, it's unlikely going to happen in a setting like this. So be successful, target attitudes. Now, it says there to avoid coercion. And coercion is taking away someone's free choice when you give them sort of an ultimatum, if you will. So the classic example of this is a bank robbery where, a robber comes in, they puts a gun in the face of the teller and says, give me all your money or I'll kill you. Now, sure, you can make the argument that, oh, well, there is a choice there. I mean, they could choose to die. Come on, that's not a realistic choice. So in that situation, the free will, because the only other option is death, was taken away, and people are forced to do something. That's not what we want to do in these sorts of speeches. We don't want to say, if you do or do not do this, you'll die. So for the climate change speeches, for example, don't go to the extreme and say, if we don't stop climate change now, it will destroy our planet and humanity will cease to exist. Is that true? Perhaps. But that's not the approach you want to take with a persuasive message to try to gain this sort of change. Because the audience in that situation would probably think, well, if the situation is that dire, then there's nothing that we can really do now, is there? I mean, come on, it can't be something that we can get out of if that's how far we're going to go if we do nothing. And they're unlikely to change. So we want to avoid coercion. We want to not let people think that, again, something terrible will happen if they do or do not follow what we're advising them to do. So again, focus on changing attitudes and do it in the ways that we'll discuss here shortly. Now, one other thing I want to mention before we get into some of these approaches to persuasion is that I see persuasion as a natural human process. I see it as a survival instinct and a defense mechanism. And here's how I arrived at that. So first of all, think about a baby being born, right? A newborn baby, they smack it on the butt. It does what? It cries. Why is it crying? Well, the real answer is because it wants to go back where it was just at. I mean, really, think about it. It was 98 degrees. It was dark. It was this strange, the only home you've ever known so far. You're in this sack of fluid that's warm. And I mean, it'd be like being in the spa in a hot tub with the lights out or really low, and you're just totally chilling, and then somebody comes in, turns on the light, hits you with cold water, and turns the air conditioner on all at the same time. I mean, that's what it is. You come out of 98 degrees and you're going into 65 degrees in a very bright, sterile room. So, of course, people are going to cry. But when we get past that, and maybe we're at home, babies cry when they need things, when they are dirty, they want to be changed. They're hungry, they want to be fed. They're sleepy, they want to be put to sleep, not put into bed. Sorry, they are they need to burp. They're gassy. They want you to burp them. These sorts of things happen with babies, and they do it not thinking about it. They don't think to themselves, how do I get the old man to come over here and wipe my butt? I'll just scream. That doesn't happen. It is a natural process, and somehow we know that will be persuasive. Then we get a little bit more advanced, if you will, or a little older, and we can put together some more logical arguments for persuasion, but the purpose is usually still the same. As a survival instinct, if you were starving and you saw someone, I hope you're never in this situation, of course, but you would beg for money or food on the street. You've seen this in movies, maybe you've seen it in person. I know I have. And that's you trying to survive. I mean, it's not what you want to do. You're ashamed of it. You're sad about it, but it's that or starve. And so you would do it as a survival instinct. You would try to persuade people to give you money or food. Now, as a defense mechanism, this is the same thing as well. I mean, if you are in, let's say, a relationship and you want to remain in that relationship, you will do what it takes to persuade that person to stay as much as you can. If you are in a job and you know that you need that job for money and someone says, well, we have to make some cuts, you're going to persuade them best you can, whether successful or not to make you one of those cuts because you need that to survive. That's your defense against poverty. Also, in the extreme examples, if someone was going to shoot you, maybe you're the bank teller, right? And they put the gun on you. I imagine that all of us would at some point say, hey, please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. And you're trying to be nice and you're trying to convince them. Some people would say like, oh man, I have kids, or I can't, please, I beg you, I have a family, blah, 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 blah. Right. And that's all persuasion. It seems very instinctual, and that's because it is. We're not going to use instinctual persuasion. We're going to use more advanced forms. And this starts for us with the rhetorical triangle. And you see it there. This is from Plato. And, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all sort of right around in there together with their ideas. But the rhetorical triangle is made up of three important factors when you're trying to persuade someone. So the Greeks would tell us that in order to be persuasive, you need to have ethos, or your credibility. For us, that would be your sources. You have good sources that back you up. You have logos, which is logical arguments with clear organization. Things make sense as you explain them. And then you need pathos, which is an emotional appeal, something like fear or compassion, guilt, pride, to sort of be the icing on top that sets everything else into action. Now, in the Greek days, they said that this needed to be equal in order to be effective. And I still think that's true today. I mean, the triangle form isn't just something that was used because there's 3 points. The triangle was used because if you think about that structure, if you take out any of those corners, the whole thing collapses. And that was their thinking, was if you take out credibility or logic or emotion, you cease to be persuasive, or as persuasive as you could be. Now, in the current day, especially, like in the 2020 election cycle and that kind of thing, most of what we saw was pathos. It was an emotionally driven message of, this person is dangerous. This group of people who one, candidate or the other is protecting you from is dangerous. If you do this thing, everything will just go to pieces. I mean, Trump used to say, if you elect Joe Biden, the stock market will crash and you'll all be poor within a week. Didn't happen. So, these kind of things are the pathos that we live with. I mean, ethos and credibility, you know, it's tough. I mean, education doesn't equal credibility. I want to be clear with that because, people with PhDs it's easy to say like, well, I'm credible. I'm only credible on my area. That's it. But, I'm thinking of some different representatives who don't have much of an education. Lots of the talking heads, the media folks that are very vocal, no education. So credibility doesn't matter. I don't know. I saw a video a couple years back from a Tennessee representative in the state state house cite an Onion article and have no idea that he was making a fool of himself. People laughed, and he asked, like, "What's so funny?" It's the Onion. Okay, so it's a newspaper, right? Oh no, man, come on. So credibility, does it matter? It does. It matters less than it used to, I think, at least right now. I think that'll shift as we go forward, and it's always in flux. But then logical arguments still matter. I mean, it still matters that things make sense as we lay them out, but we have stopped largely teaching logic in an Aristotelian way, at least for Aristotle. And what the danger is in that is where someone can give you a plan that seems logical, but someone else who is, skilled in the use of logic will tell you there's lots of holes there, lots of holes in that plan. But when we're not educated about logical persuasion, logical arguments, people can fool us with lots of stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of things out there. You hear a lot of politicians, Trump was big on this too, where he would just say things like, believe me, believe me, believe me. In 2 weeks, we're going to do the thing. In 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. There was no logical explanation. There was no credible explanation either. Like, I've never done this before, and I can't give you a clear plan, but trust me, it'll be fine. And people did. Why? Pathos. Because of pathos, the emotional appeal, the fear mongering or false sense of hope and joy that could come in the future. And so what we need to remember is that we want to be as effective as we can be at persuasion. So we're going to cover all three of these in our speeches. And we're going to talk about those individually. And that's here. So an ethos, or using character and credibility to persuade. So what is an appeal to ethos? This is when you're citing sources for us, because no one here is an expert, I don't think, in any particular area. When we cite experts, we cite easily recognizable sources. Now, it's fine to include personal experience. As you, the speaker, have experienced something, include that if it aligns well with what you're getting from the experts. One of the big problems we have, I think, in society today with being easily persuaded is when people use what's called a hasty generalization. And what that means is they think if something happened to them in a certain way, then that's the way it is. And that's not always the case. That's where we get prejudice from, right? So, if you have interacted with one member of a particular group of people, whatever group you want that to be, and you had a bad experience, then it's prejudice to say, prejudging to say, all those folks, whoever they are just like that. Whether that's a race, a religion, a profession, you name it, a sex, and they're all that way. They're not. I don't know what it is or who it is, but I can guarantee you they are not all that way. And so you want your personal story, personal experience to be supplemented by, or act as a supplement of, one way or the other, the expert evidence that's out there. Now, some small ways that you can come across as having more character, credibility, would be things like your appearance when you speak. You don't have to dress up in a suit, men or women, but looking appropriate will help you gain credibility. Your demeanor will help you gain credibility, and the way that you deliver a message, seeming confident helps with credibility, even if you're not very credible. There's an idea that's, I think it's from Anchorman in Brick, said, just show up on time and smile, and that's how you get here. I mean, it's kind of true. It's kind of true, especially for, some groups of folks. The key thing, though, for me anyway, is consistency. That you need to make sure that you're not doing or saying anything that's countering your credibility. So, for example, if you were giving a speech on recycling and you were at your desk, we were back in school, and you were drinking a Diet Coke or something, and when the class was over, you walked by the trash can and dropped it in there instead of the recycle bin. Well, now your speech is over, but you still lost credibility because somebody saw you do that, and now forget it. And what's really bad is once you lose it, it's almost impossible to get it back. And so no matter what you talk about in the future, people are going to question you. So be consistent. And that goes from the beginning of the speech, when you look appropriate, you seem confident, to the part of the speech, that during the speech moments where you're delivering information credibly, and then at the end, you're being consistent. So be sure to know what you don't know. And it's okay to tell people that. Say, listen, I'm not an expert on this. I've found these expert opinions in this other specific area of this. I can't make a comment on that. So what I'm talking about today is, and then you get specific. And so that's called delimiting, but it's the idea that you're blocking some things out and saying, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm very specifically talking about this thing because I have experts who know about this and I've experienced this. So, use that not only for this class, but moving forward in life. And that will help you move to advancement. I mean, really, being a credible person. Now, logos, again, relating to the use of logic to persuade, is important. And the thing with this, though, appeals to logic, as you see on the screen, relies on the logic of both the speaker and the audience to make it effective. So what I mean there is the speaker, first of all, needs to be able to use quality logic. They need to be able to explain why, as you see down there with Socrates, A equals B, B equals C, A equals C, right? They need to be able to line that out for a person. So the example with that is, if all apples are red and, A equals B, so all apples are red and all red things are apples, then apples are apples. I mean, that's one way to look at it, but it's using this sort of linear logic to connect points. And I know you probably haven't had a logic class. You may have. We offer those. But you want to do your best just to stay well organized and let things make sense clearly to an audience. You don't want them to have to fill in any gaps. So, Aristotle had an idea that came to be known anyway as the why did I just blank on that? Syllogism. It's a fun word to say, a syllogism. And what that does is it gives you partial logic, and then it relies on the audience to make the last connection. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we are going 100%. Here are the examples. So you see another example of it there. Socrates is a man, men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. But be careful, because there are easy ways to slip up here. And you see another bad example. Fish are animals. Fish live in water. Therefore, all animals live in water. Nope, we don't, and we're animals too. Now, going back to the audience for a moment. If the audience doesn't understand logic, you could use great logic and it's not going to connect with them. Both the speaker and the audience need to be in somewhat common areas when it comes to understanding logic. And you see there, if there's high speaker logic but low audience logic, the audience sees the speaker in extreme terms. So maybe they are thinking, wow, this person's great. Or maybe you come across as the know-it-all. Like, oh, look at them. Think they're smart because they went to school. That doesn't work for everyone. Now, if there's a low speaker logic and high audience logic, you're probably not going to be effective at all, because the audience is going to look at you as someone below them on the intelligence or academic scales, whatever those look like. But if you have roughly matched levels of logic, that's when the persuasion can really happen. You, though, hear me out on this. You need to be able to go to that, near the highest uses of logic, the very advanced forms of logic. But you also need to be able to understand where your audience is on that same sort of scale and how you can back down to their level. That's really, really important. Um, Aristotle said that the best way to persuade anyone to do anything is to agree with them to a point. And what he means there is, if you have someone who doesn't like to recycle, they think it's, a waste of their time, then you need to agree with them to a point. And that point would be somewhere around agreeing that, yeah, you know what, it is time consuming. Yep, you're right. You're right. We all do have better things that we need to do. And you're also right that there are probably more effective ways to, combat climate change or save the earth. There probably are. You're right about all of that. But, and that's where the switch comes, right? But even with all of that, what about all these benefits? What about doing our part? What about this is, yeah, time consuming and not the easiest thing ever, but it probably is one of the easiest good things to do. So if you need to do it, you want to be good, right? You want to do something good. Yeah, sure. This is the easiest one. So this is the one maybe you should think about twice. And so just that sort of use of logic to get them to agree with you and you with them, but then show them where you differ and why. And that's a good tool for persuasion. Now, with persuasion and logos, be aware of fallacies or a fallacious argument. I have a PowerPoint on that, which I will post, but there are some common ones that are seen frequently. We see these every day, the ones on this list. I think there's 230 some odd logical fallacies out there. These are the ones that I want to cover briefly. So an ad hominem fallacy is one that's to a person. That's what it means, to the man. But it's when you personally attack someone. And again, I don't mean to hark on him because he's gone now, but the Trump approach to people who he didn't like was to make up a name for them. Little Marco, Lion Ted, Low Energy Jeb, Crazy Hillary, that sort of thing. And so that is a personal attack, which someone who's educated should hear, identify, and then disregard, right? The idea should be, what does it mean to me if this person has to resort to name calling as a first line of defense? It means there's not much else there. And so that is a dead giveaway. That should be a red flag, right? Something is wrong here with this person's use of logic or ability to understand logic. The second one is a causal fallacy. And this is when you say that one thing caused another to happen without sufficient evidence. So, you may say that the pandemic caused Grand Valley to raise its tuition. Okay, what's your backup for that? What really went wrong there? Then you could see people going a little deeper and saying, well, the pandemic actually caused lower enrollment numbers, and those lower enrollment numbers then led to needing to raise the price of tuition. But then you could think about, well, the state of Michigan doesn't give us as much funding as they used to. You see where I'm going with this? There's a lot of causes. So what you need to do, one of two things. One is to give a full accounting of what actually caused something else to happen. Be thorough. Or the other thing, too, is to say, listen, there are multiple causes to this outcome. I'm only going to focus on this one, and here's why. And that is, again, delimiting. It's taking out, what you're not going to talk about and focuses the audience on this particular element. And so you need to do one or the other if you think about making a causal statement. This caused that to happen. The third is a slippery slope fallacy. And this one means that people will make an argument saying if you take one step toward progression or regression, that you will then end up in a very progressed or regressed state. And so one of the classic examples there, before it was legal in America, was same-sex marriage. You would hear people make arguments against same-sex marriage. And one of the arguments they would use is, where does it stop? Where does it stop? So if we allow two men, two women to marry each other, what about when someone wants to marry their dog? What about when someone wants to marry their car? What about when someone wants to marry themselves, right? I mean, okay, no. Where does it stop? The answer is with two consenting adults of sound mind. I mean, that's it. And so these sorts of arguments are just meant to distract. And what they're, again, meant to do is become sort of an emotional driven argument where people are afraid, like, oh, wow, I won't even know what my country looks like if that were to happen. And that's the idea of slippery slopes. Same thing with, legalizing marijuana before that was a thing, recreational. And it was, well, if you legalize marijuana, then you're going to end up having a junkie on every corner with a needle in their arm. Wait, you shoot up your weed? Like, it's strange. It doesn't seem very logical because it's not. But if you are already buying into the argument and you're already in a position to where you're against something and someone gives you this sort of argument to get you more against it, you'll take whatever you can get. We call that the echo chamber, right? You only want to hear things that support your beliefs and you don't want to hear anything that's contradictory. And so fallacies go toward that end. Now, the next one may look familiar to folks, especially sports fans. So this is a bandwagon fallacy. The bandwagon in sports, if you say someone jumps on a bandwagon, it means that they weren't a fan of a particular team or person or whatever. And once that person or team started to win, perform well, they became a fan. You might hear this called a fair weather fan too. So, when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl a couple years ago, well, I guess the year before last, you started seeing Chiefs gear in places that you would never see it before. And I always like to talk to people when I see something like that. And I'll say, oh, you're a big Chiefs fan, huh? Oh, yeah. Well, how long you been a Chiefs fan? Well, I mean, I'm just sort of getting into it. Oh, okay. So you're on the bandwagon. And that's the idea. Hipsters do this with music, right? Well, I really liked their first couple albums, but then they went mainstream and sold out, and I'm really not a fan, right? So they sort of do the anti-bandwagon. But it's claiming that something is good because it's popular or successful. That's not always the case, right? Something can be popular and not so good. Something can be really good and not so popular. We know that dieting isn't all that popular in America, but is it good for you? Yeah, probably. Not by dieting, I just mean eating healthy. So we see it on both sides. Speaking of both sides, the next fallacy is an either or fallacy. And this is when someone creates an ultimatum and they make it seem as though only two options or two choices exist, when in reality, there are multiple options or choices. So think about here the pro-choice, pro-life debate. So with this one, you'll hear people say, are you pro-choice or are you pro-life? And most people have an answer ready, right? They identify as one or the other. But in reality, I think you would have a hard time finding large groups of either pro-life or pro-choice people. Think about a continuum. You've sort of got this line, and on one extreme is pro-life or pro-choice, and on the other extreme is the other. So let's say pro-life is here and pro-choice is here. People who are pro-life will often say, I am against abortion, except in the case of, right? Whatever that might be, mother's health, the child's health, potentially rape, incest, age, those sorts of things. So are they really pro-life anymore? Not really. They lean that way, but they're not over there. Same thing on the other side. If you have someone, well, I am pro-choice. I think that I support the right to choose. Okay. Well, I mean, except, and then they'll give you some reasons there. They'll talk about if the abortion is because they want, the parent wants a designer baby and this happened to be a boy and they wanted a girl, or vice versa. And I'm also not for it if it is, in that last trimester, like day of partial birth kind of stuff. I'm not for it if, this is something that has been done over and over again to the point where now talk about women's health. If this procedure is done, it could kill the mother. So, there are really lots of us in this middle ground. We all lean one way or another, but we're not extremes. And when you make it seem as though there are only two choices, you're either with us or against us, that's not really a logical position to take. There are multiple choices. Next up is a straw fallacy. This means it refers to a straw man or a scarecrow. And the idea here is that a scarecrow or a straw man is very easy to defeat, to beat up, right? Because they can't fight back. You can just knock them down and they won't get up. They won't defend themselves because they're not innate. They're not inanimate objects. So with that one in an argumentative sort of position here, using this fallacy would mean that you represent the opposition to your side in a way that doesn't give them the credit they deserve. And you could stick with the same pro-life, pro-choice. I mean, you'll hear people on the pro-life side say, oh, well, the people over on the pro-choice side are just heathens who are godless, that sort of thing. They don't understand what they're doing. Okay. Then on the other side, the pro-choice side, you'll hear people say about pro-lifers, these people want to take women's rights back to the 1500s. And, they are so concerned about, their version of the truth. They don't even take into account scientific versions of the truth. Okay. That's just not the case for most people on either side. We have our positions for a variety of reasons. Now, sure, some will fall into those extremes, those straw sort of arguments, but most won't. So make sure that you actually explain the other side in a complete way so that you can then show the difference, the contrast between your position and theirs and why yours is better. Now, that's not required in one of your speeches. Again, this is all just general information on persuasion. But keep in mind that you don't want to make another argument seem weak when in reality it's going to make your own seem weak because people will see through that. Next to last is a red herring fallacy. This refers to a fish, a red herring, not a heron, but a red herring is a fish. And this comes from sort of medieval times. They used to have debtors' prisons. And so if you owed money to someone or the government or whoever, and you couldn't pay that debt, they put you in prison, which didn't make any sense to me because how are you going to work it off? Oh, wait, the answer was your family has to work it off. And so, for a lot of these folks, this was sort of a low security situation, and there were many escapes. And the folks who would escape would obviously run away. They want to get away. Well, we've probably all heard that, release the hounds saying, and that's where this came from. Because they're going to release these hounds to track down the escaped prisoner. And where the red herring comes in is that many of the escapees would try to find a stream or, some body of water, and they'd get in it. And the idea was twofold. One, it sort of reduces your scent for those dogs that are chasing you. And two, they wanted to find a fish. And so red herring is the name that came. So what the person would do, the escapee, would grab the fish if possible and rip it into two parts. I know, sounds awful, I'm sure it was. But you rip it into two parts and you throw one part one way, you throw the other part the opposite way, and then you run the third way. Because remember, the fourth way is back where you came. You don't want to go there. What would happen then sometimes is the dogs would lose the smell a little bit because they went into the water, but they'd pick up the smell of a nasty fish laying out in the sun, and they'd want to go check it out. Meanwhile, that's just a delay where you can get further and further away. So what that is a distraction. And so a red herring is a distraction. And this would come in with what we call today whataboutisms. So if you are criticizing whether it's family, friend, politician, boss, you name it, you'll hear people say things like, Joe Biden is someone who doesn't seem, people who don't like him would say something like, he doesn't seem to have his mental facilities all working right. His faculties are not fully functional. And then someone else will say, well, yeah, but what about Donald Trump? He couldn't even speak in full sentences. Okay, both may be true. But you can't say because I brought this thing up about your person, then it negates this thing about my person. Let's say, hypothetically, I don't know this, but they both have issues. Okay, that's the truth. But when one brings up the other, when supporters of one bring up the other, whichever direction it happens to go, that's a red herring. You're distracting from the point. People will use this in arguments, especially significant others, inexperienced debaters. And so be on the lookout for it and call it out. People will say, well, we're here talking about, we have to reduce carbon emissions. Oh, so you want us all to be on windmills, huh? No, that's a distraction. There are many ways, including windmills, that we can do this. But no, I never made that claim. Stop distracting. Call them out. That, to an audience who's watching, makes it really look like you're in control, because you are. You've showed them, look, you're making a mistake logically. Here's what that mistake is, and here's what you need to do next. Move on. Now, the last one here is an appeal to misplaced authority. This is almost any celebrity endorsement commercial that you've ever seen. There are tons of these out there, but what comes to mind for me is Proactive, the facial cleanser. They've had tons of celebrities do their commercials. Justin Bieber did one that's in the PowerPoint that I'll post. But with that one, he's on there, and it's the young Justin Bieber, not, greasy Justin Bieber. But, he was talking about, oh, no, this is the great facial cleaner. It's the best one ever on the thing, and it works for me, and oh, my God. What do you think he really knows about that topic? How many books do you think he's read? You could just stop there. How many books do you think he's read? How many books do you think he's read on mixing together facial astringents in order to create the best cleaner? None is the answer. All he knows is that perhaps it did work for him. I'll take him at his word. So he knows that it worked for him. But we've already said, you can't say just because it worked for me, it should work for you. That's not always the case. He has no expertise in the field. And when people buy this thinking, well, Bieber likes it, I should get it, that's an appeal to misplaced authority. He's not an authority, but you're treating him as such. And so that's when you want to make sure you're only citing experts. And that will help when you're really going to rely on them as a source. Now, again, you can cite other people in examples, right, to tell their stories or their experiences that go along with the expert testimony or opinion. Last thing here on logic is that you can use the tool of refutation before anyone ever even gives you something to refute. Here's how that would work. It's a preemptive strike. So if I am arguing that stand-up comedy is public speaking, what I would say at some point would be, I know what many of you are thinking right now. Stand-up comedy is just a person telling jokes, and there are a variety of these people. Some of them are deadpan. They don't look at the audience. They just get up there and talk, and then they sit down. That's not public speaking. I get that. Here's my refutation. I understand why you would feel that way. Here's Aristotle. And I agree with you that not all of them are great examples of public speaking. But where we differ is that they are still in front of a public and they are speaking, and that's public speaking. Simple as that. Right? So I say set them up and knock them down before they can even think to themselves as an audience, yeah, but what about the thing? Acknowledge it and then shut it down. All right. Next up, we have covered credibility and ethos. We've covered logic and logos, and now let's cover emotion and pathos. We watched some commercials in the last video. We watched the I've fallen and can't get up commercial, the life alert. And that one had a lot of emotional appeals. And when you think about these, there are as many types of appeals as there are emotions, but you could divide them into two big categories: fear appeals and positive appeals. So what do you think the life alert commercial used? Fear, right? They showed you the grandmother at the bottom of the steps face down. So a fear appeal is any time that you tell someone about what negative outcomes may happen as a result of their action or inaction. And again, you can't say you're going to die. That's coercion. But you could say things like, smoking cigarettes greatly increases your chance of all these different illnesses. Sure. In some countries, not in ours, on packs of cigarettes, there are images of diseased lungs that have been removed from a body, someone with lung cancer dying. There's close-ups of an open stoma, or when they put the hole in your throat. These are on the cigarette packs so that every time you get one out, they want you to have to look at it and think to yourself, man, is this really worth it? And that is a fear appeal. Now, on the flip side, if it's stick with smoking, if it's a positive appeal, you will see positive messages, right? If you stop or don't start, here's what you can expect. You're going to have a longer on average life expectancy. You're going to smell better. You're going to have more money. People won't mind being around you. You're not going to have to go outside every hour or whatever it is to, feed this addiction. And you just won't have the addiction in and of itself. So all those great things that can come from either stopping or never starting would be the positive appeals. Now, to be as thorough as you can, try to use both. And that doesn't mean that you take a ton of time for this, but plug both in. And so you may say something like, continuing to smoke cigarettes puts you at a greater risk for cancer. And that's a serious problem, obviously. I mean, this many people die of lung cancer a year. And if you stop, here's my refutation, while that is not a guarantee that you still can't get sick or won't get sick, it greatly reduces your chances of those same illnesses. And after a period of, I think it's 10, 15 years, your lungs, if you haven't developed lung cancer at that point, you probably have the same likelihood as someone who never smoked in their life. Positive, right? So it's sort of, here's the doom and gloom and here's the rays of sunshine. Use both. Now, to get specific with these emotions, you can target things like pride, guilt, anxiety, authority. Again, the Life Alert commercial does all of this. The pride is the fact that those who are watching it will feel pride if they purchase it for either themselves or their elderly parent, right? So now they're going to feel like, man, I'm taking care of myself if they're the parent, or I'm taking care of my parents if they're the kid. Guilt is sort of built into that commercial without having to say it. Why was she even alone in that house having to do her own laundry anyway? Can't you, as a child of an elderly parent, come over and at least help with the laundry downstairs or get that thing moved upstairs? I feel so bad. The parents will watch it and think, God, if that happened to me, I know that he or she would never forgive themselves, the kid. And that's so much guilt to live with, and I don't want them to deal with that. Anxiety, the elderly parent. What if that happens to me? I don't want to have to lay down there. Oh my gosh, I have my steps in my house too. What am I going to do? The kid, that looks like mom's house. She has those steps where her washer's downstairs. Oh man, I got to do something about this. And then authority is when they have the guy in the uniform shirt answering the Life Alert call, right? Help is on the way. He's the authority, and help is because of Life Alert. Now, this comes in a lot of different forms as well. You can watch some different commercials and see how this works. But target something specific if you want to really have a good chance at making change, even on the attitudinal level. So go back, watch those examples from Monroe's, and that should help make sense. Now, this was a brief video because really we've sort of covered quite a bit in the last video. So go back and watch that. Again, I will put up a PowerPoint on fallacies so that you have access to that and you can watch that whenever you want. And from there, we will get ready to work on the persuasive outline. Again, this week, it's just quiz 4 that's due by Friday at 5 p.m. Then next week, week 10, is when your persuasive outline will be due. So just so we're all on the same page, let's literally go back to the same page. Make sure we see it together. So this is where you're going to turn it in. Week 11, you're going to give your first persuasive speech. The next week, I'll give you feedback. We'll talk about PowerPoint. You'll do quiz 5. Then you're going to turn in your PowerPoint. I'll give you more feedback. Then it's your persuasive speech. Then we're done. So it's coming quick. It's coming quick. Hang in there. You're going to make it. All right. If you have questions on this or anything else related to the class, as always, let me know. We can meet up in office hours, or we can make an appointment. We can email, whatever works best for you. We can make it happen. So let me know if you have questions. I'd much rather you ask me than do something wrong and make a bad grade on something and then ask me later for extra credit. Let's just talk now if you have any questions, if you're not certain that you are clear on all of this. All right. As always, thanks again, and I will see you next time.